Hello and welcome. I am so glad to have you here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. If we have not met before, my name is Nicole Clausen. I am the co-founder of Inventory Ally, along with my lovely dear friend Sophia. She is the director of customer success at Inventory Ally, and I'm so excited to talk to you today about one of my favorite topics, inventory. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen really quick, and oops, I guess it would be helpful to start from the beginning, huh? So welcome to how to track, analyze, and improve inventory metrics for higher profits. So today we're going to be talking all about different metrics that you can use to paint the picture of the health of your inventory. And so that's really what I like to look at when it comes to key performance indicators or metrics. So we're going to dive in to talk about that. And then Sophia is going to walk us through kind of how Inventory Ally helps to kind of automate all of this process for you. So if we have not met before, my name is Nicole Clausen. I am an operations director turned inventory consultant. I'm a big time spreadsheet lover, ocean obsessed, and I'm the author of Inventory Management for Veterinary Professionals. I also am a huge cold pressed juice lover. I make it every week. I'm an avid reader. I don't go anywhere without my Kindle. The Office is my comfort show, and I also collect crystals and minerals. And that on the screen is my soul dog, Tank. He passed away a couple of years ago, but I just include him in everything because, he's my soul dog. So, so that's just a little bit about me. And so today's agenda is we're going to talk about three main KPIs or key performance indicators. So first and foremost is cost of goods sold as a percentage of revenue. We're also going to talk about inventory turnover and the value of inventory on hand. So for each of these metrics, we'll look at why they matter, some benchmarks to aim for, and then we're going to go to the whiteboard and do some calculation examples together. So that's where we are headed for today. And so before we kind of even get started with that, I want to kind of go over what exactly a KPI or a key performance indicator is. So what a KPI is it's essentially a measure or metric of certain factors or certain benchmarks or certain goals that help inspire action. So for example, some KPIs in your practice might be the number of new patient visits, the number of new clients, the average transaction charge per doctor, your cost of goods sold. So it can be different kind of metrics that let you know how well or what you need to improve on in your practice. So we have also created a worksheet for you that you can, with kind of like a bank of different metrics that you can track in your practice. And so you can kind of use that worksheet. And so I like to think about KPIs or metrics as almost like lab work for the health of our practice. So, we run lab work, we have these diagnostics to kind of paint the picture of what's going on internally for our creature friends. And we have these reference ranges where we like to see different values kind of align. It's very, very similar with our key performance indicators. We have different metrics, and then we have different benchmarks or reference ranges that ideally our practice should kind of fall within. So then if we're outside of those reference ranges, it gives us a good picture of, oh, hey, this might be an area of opportunity for us. And so that's what I like to think about metrics as. Now, most of the time, I like to monitor these, once a month because let's say, for example, if our cost of goods sold, also kind of a snapshot of our inventory costs, let's say if we went all year without checking this number, it might be much higher than we would like, but we waited the whole year to find that out. So by monitoring this number on a regular basis, it really allows us the opportunity to do a small course correction rather than a major overhaul. So before we get started, I would love to just let me know in the chat, make sure that you can hear me, make sure that you can see us okay. Tell us where you're tuning in from. I am currently in Montana. It is sunny. There's like 3 clouds in the sky and the birds are chirping. I'm not sure if you can hear them, but they're just like having a field day out there. So love to hear kind of where you are. And Sophia, tell us, where are you tuning in from today?
Absolutely. I'm all the way up here in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Super excited to be with you here. And the sun is shining here too, and all the dogs playing in the backyard. So I'm not going to complain.
It's really all we can hope for, right?
Right? Exactly.
Okay, so the first one that we will look at today is the cost of goods sold. So this is the one that you've probably heard of before. It's probably the one that you're familiar with. So it's often calculated as COGS, right? That's a lot of times what we'll hear about, like COGS this, COGS that, that's kind of always what we hear. So when you hear the term COGS, what it means is the cost of goods sold. But what's actually usually meant is the cost of goods sold as a percentage of your revenue, because otherwise COGS in itself is just a dollar amount. So cost of goods sold is a really great snapshot into kind of our inventory spend. It's basically shows the relationship in our practice between our revenue and our costs. So to calculate this number, we really need 2 main pieces of information: your total costs and your revenue. And so this number often has some confusion attached to it, because there's kind of a couple reasons. But a lot of times when people hear the term COGS, they just think inventory spend, or they aren't really quite sure exactly what's included in it. And so a good way that I like to think about your COGS is basically anything that's related to caring for a patient. So this is all of our injectables, pharmaceuticals, food, retail items, but also it's reference labs and in-house labs. It's also our cremation and mortuary costs. So there's a lot more involved and included in that than just what we spend on inventory. So we might think about it in 2 different ways, right? We might have our overarching cost of goods sold as a percentage of revenue, which includes all of those things, but maybe a smaller portion of that could be our individual inventory spend. Some of the things that it does not include is janitorial supplies, office supplies, and labor expenses. Now, if you ever have any questions as far as like what is included or what should be included, AHA has a really great free resource called the AHA Chart of Accounts. And that is a document and kind of a way of structuring your chart of accounts in your accounting software to kind of align with AHA. And so within that, they have a ton of like guidance for as far as exactly what should and shouldn't be included. So that's kind of an area that I see people, there's sometimes some confusion on. So a lot of times if you're like, oh my gosh, my cost of goods are so high, I feel like I'm doing everything right and I can't quite figure it out, I just invite you to look at what is actually going into that category to make sure that it's classified correctly. So then thinking about, how often should we calculate this? I like to look at your cost of goods sold each and every month, right? Because we want to understand what the relationship is between your costs and your revenue. I also like to look to see and kind of monitor for trends throughout the year, right? So like, if in January, let's just say it was 26%, and then 26.5, and then 27, and then 28, and it keeps on going up and up, that's really important information that we need to know. So to calculate this, it's actually fairly an easy calculation. I think the hardest part about calculating your cost of goods is just making sure that you have the right numbers to calculate it with. And so usually the best place to find this information is going to be from the profit and loss statement from your accounting software, because that will have the most accurate picture. I tend to not use like purchasing reports from your practice management system because, right, as we just heard, our inventory spend is not the same thing as our cost of goods sold. So we need those cremation costs in there. We need our lab costs. So to calculate our cost of goods sold as a percentage of revenue, we take our cost of goods sold and divide it by revenue. And then we multiply it by 100 to find the percent. So it's a fairly easy calculation. The key is making sure that our numbers that we're entering into the calculation are as accurate as possible. So a big question that I get all the time, like every day basically, is what should my cost of goods sold be? And the short answer is it depends, right? A lot of times we hear this kind of like, oh, it should be 20%. So we should have 20% cost of goods sold as a percentage of revenue. But it also really heavily depends on your practice. So, for example, a small animal GP location, they can aim to have between 18 and 22%. That's a good place to be. But an ER and specialty practice might only be 5 to 15%. Whereas for a large or mixed animal practice, it could be 22% and even much higher. And really kind of the reason of why this is what is called a sales to product mix. So let's take a look at our large animal friends, right? A lot of times, especially if our clients are big ranches, big farms, we do a lot of herd health management. That is a lot of inventory. Think about all those vaccines, all that dewormer, all the things, all those antibiotics, all those basically those products that go into into those farms, ranches, etc. So we might have, maybe let's just say, we'll just say for example's sake, right, we have 20% of a patient's visit is actually a service, right, a service that we're providing for that ranch, but then 80% of that visit is maybe product sales. So we generate a lot more revenue from product sales. But if we kind of flip the script a little bit and look at our ER and specialty friends, oftentimes it's the exact opposite, where they generate a lot more revenue from services and don't carry nearly as much inventory, right? They don't have flea, tick, and heartworm prevention. They don't have a ton of diets. Usually there's not a lot of supplements. Typically, the pharmacy itself is fairly lean. A lot more times there's more supplies and etc. But usually there's a lot more revenue generated from services than inventory. And so that's why we see this big fluctuation between what your cost of goods should be and can be, right? You might have, if you have a large animal practice and you do a ton of work with really large, local area farms and ranches, that you provide a lot of vaccines, dewormer, and other products to, your cost of goods might naturally be at 40% just because of the different sales to product mix. Now, if you had, let's say, if you had a like equine reproduction facility, let's just say, where the amount of product is very small, and then the amount of revenue generated by services is significantly higher, it's going to be different. So we want to make sure when we're looking at our cost of goods sold that we are comparing apples to apples and not octopus to apples. So we want to kind of take our, take our kind of unique practice into consideration for this. So
one thing I keep hearing too is always people want to chase that percentage for the dollars at the risk of the dollar. So completely agree with you, Nicole.
Yeah, so it's really important, yeah, to take your kind of unique practice into consideration. And so if we think about, oh my gosh, my cost of goods are higher than what I'd like them to be, how can I actually improve this number? And so a lot of times, our first instinct, if our cost of goods are high, we just want to spend less. But that actually, oftentimes, well, usually, 99% of the time is not the best way to go. We just don't want to immediately restrict our spending. We want to make sure that we're actually optimizing our spending to make sure we're purchasing the right products in the right amounts, but also that we're generating enough revenue. Because if we go back to our equation, right, there's two variables. There's our cost, but there's also our revenue. So if we aren't generating enough revenue, or we're having some kind of revenue leak, right? We have a lot of mischarges, we have a lot of discounts, et cetera, our cost of goods will always kind of be high until we get to the root cause of that. Um, so there's kind of quite a few factors that go into having high cost of goods. But if you think of anything that increases your costs but keeps your revenue the same, is going to increase your cost of goods. On the flip side, anything that decreases your revenue but keeps your costs the same, that's also going to increase your cost. So if you have a lot of discounts, mischarges, if you don't have a pricing structure set up correctly, that'll also impact your cost of goods sold. So without further ado, let's go ahead and we're going to go to the whiteboard and we are going to do some examples together. I was never like the biggest fan of math class, like in high school and stuff like that. But you know what? I love doing example problems. So we're going to do some together, and I hope you bear with me just to make hopefully all the technology works as it should. So we're just going to, just bear with me. And I'm so sorry. You're going to see the mirror. Oops. Oh, no. Oh, I jinxed myself. I'm going to try and refresh my screen and see if that helps.
Have to always have a little bit of technical difficulties, but we'll be right back on track.
Yay. Okay. See, now we're cooking with fire. See, turning it off and on again helps every time. That's just what you got to do.
It wouldn't be a successful webinar if there wasn't something.
Okay, so let's go ahead and do some examples on the whiteboard. So I hope you can read my chicken scratch, but so kind of as we think about anytime we do any kind of formula, calculation, examples, I always like to write out my equation and I like to write out my variables. And I feel like this just really helps to make sure we don't get lost in the math. This will be extra helpful when it comes to our inventory turnover because it's a multi-step calculation. But anytime you're doing any kind of like dosage calculations, medical math, anything like that, I always find, especially when you're just getting started and used to it, write out the equation and write out your variables. So let's go ahead and do this together. So let's just say we have in our example practice, Orca Animal Hospital. Let's say they're kind of coming up on their annual review and they want to check their KPIs to kind of see where they're at. And so we have Georgia, who is our practice manager. She kind of gathers up these numbers. She looks at the profit and loss statement, and she sees that over the last 12 months, their cost of goods sold were $305,000. Now, this practice's revenue was $985,000. So now, once we know our two variables, we can plug it into our equation. So we have our cost of goods sold divided by our revenue multiplied by 100. Now, I will preface this. I have no idea what these numbers are going to turn out to be, so we're going to go on an adventure together. So we'll enter our costs at $305,000 and the revenue of $985,000. So now I never leave home without my calculator. It's my favorite thing in the world. So if we do the math on this, this comes out to 0.309. So we need then to multiply it by 100 to give us our percentage. So for this practice, it's their cost of goods sold is 30.9%. Now, let's say the Orca Animal Hospital is a small animal GP. So we said earlier, kind of a good range to be is 18 to 22%. So at 31%, their cost of goods are probably much, much higher. So if we take this one step further, just because I always think this is interesting, is let's think about how much money they would save if they brought their cost of goods down. So let's just say maybe they even drop their cost of goods to, let's just say maybe they have a goal of 22%. Okay. So if we find, let's see, so if we take 985,000, so 22%, that would mean that they are spending $216,000 on inventory. So if we kind of find the difference here, so if this practice brought their cost of goods from 31% to 22%, they would save, are you ready for this? $88,300, right? If we think about what we could do with that, I mean, the possibilities are literally endless, right? We could give the staff bonuses. We could invest in new equipment, that beautiful new like dental scaling machine on it. Need a new ultrasound? Okay, yes, please. Need to replace some workstations? Okay. I think that's really why I love kind of streamlining your inventory and getting it under control, because streamlining your inventory costs really opens up so much possibility for what you can do. So, as I mentioned, the cost of goods sold calculation is fairly easy. We just want to make sure that we have the right information going into it. So let's just do one more here before we move on. So we will write out our, I'm just going to shorthand it because we know what we're kind of trying to solve for. So if we go back up here, right, we can see we'll write out our calculation. And actually, I'm going to do this. Divided by our revenue. Like, wait, how do you spell revenue? Okay, so let's see then for Tank's Animal Hospital. Their cost of goods, we'll do a little bit different one. Let's see, their cost of goods, $785,000. Now remember, they found this number from their profit and loss statement, not from a report from their software or anything like that, because we want to make sure that this number is all encompassing for their cost of goods sold. And you'll actually, when you go into your profit and loss, if you are not familiar with them, if you've never seen one before, there'll actually be a line in there that says like total cost of goods sold. So that's where you can kind of find that number. You'll see on your profit and loss, you'll see a total cost of goods and you'll see a total income or total revenue. And so that's where you can kind of find these numbers. So then let's just say that their revenue was 1.9 million. And then we'll multiply that by 100. So let's enter that into our cute little calculator here. Oops. Not 19 billion. I wish that was revenue, but probably not. Okay. So this is a little bit of an extreme example. Oops. So I multiplied by 100 all at the same time. But so actually, let me do this. Since this is more technically correct, right? We got to show our work. Okay, so this practice, their cost of goods sold is 41.3%. So they have quite a bit of room. So let's kind of see what they could save. Let's say, for example, for this hospital, they're like, ooh, I don't think the 22 is a place that I could ever be at. Maybe this is a large or mixed animal practice. They do a lot of work with quite a few dairy farms. So they're like, I don't think that 22% is ever going to be possible for me. As a large animal or mixed animal practice, maybe 30 is a good goal for me. So we'll say that their goal cost of goods is 30%. So if they were only spending, or if their cost of goods were only 30%, that would mean that they are spending $570,000 a year on their inventory. So the difference between what they're spending now and what they would be spending, are you ready for this? Are you sitting down? $215,000. So this practice could save over $200,000 a year by decreasing their cost of goods sold. And so remember, we can either decrease our costs by making sure that we don't have a huge inventory, we don't have an extra large pharmacy, we're stocking the things that make sense to our practice, we're not overstocking, but also making sure that we're generating the appropriate revenue at the same time. So, okay, we're going to try this. We're going to go stop mirroring. We're going to go back. Yeah, look at us. We did the technology thing. Okay, so that's kind of how you can calculate your cost of goods sold. So that is such a great indicator of just a quick snapshot of your inventory health. Now, the next metric or key performance indicator that I like to look at is your inventory turnover. And so this really measures and looks at the efficiency and how efficient your inventory is. And so this kind of measures how quickly or slowly your inventory moves in and out of your practice. So, measuring our inventory turnover is an essential key performance indicator or metric because it really is the most significant indicator of inventory efficiency. So one of the things I love about metrics is they tend to work together, right? If you have high cost of goods sold, your inventory turnover is probably pretty low because that means that you have a lot of inventory that's sitting on the shelf for a long period of time. And so when we have a healthy turnover, that means we don't have things sitting on the shelf for much too long. And it helps to kind of measure how well we're generating revenue from our inventory, right? Because we are only generating revenue from it if we're actually selling it. So if it's just sitting on this shelf, that's not generating revenue. So generally, our inventory turnover should match our billing cycle on average. So let's say if you're on statement billing, this means your goal is 12 to 14 times a year, right? Kind of what the idea of is we want to use or sell our inventory before we ever have to pay for it. So the inventory turnover is kind of a multi-step formula. And so the very first step of this is we want to calculate the average inventory on hand. So one of the downsides or challenges of calculating your turnover is you need to know your starting and your inventory turnover. So let's say, for example, I wanted to measure inventory on, let's just say, cephalexin over the last 12 months. So I would need to know how much I had on the shelf June 1st of 2024, which would be our starting, as well as how much inventory was on the shelf on the end of the 12 months. So on June 1st of 2025. And so a lot of times our practice management system doesn't allow you to see retroactively what you had on the shelf. So a lot of times you might have to say, oh, I know that in 6 months, right, I want to calculate my turnover. So I need to document now what I have on the shelf so that in 6 months I'm able to do this calculation. And so a lot of times what you can do is you can just run like an inventory report in your software that shows you everything that you have on hand. And then you could just save that. And so you have it like every 6 months. So if you ever need to go back and look at a number, you can do that. So that's kind of a tip for that. So then once we calculate our average inventory on hand, then we use that calculation to find the turnover ratio. So this gives you the number of average turns per year. And so turns is essentially the one turn is inventory coming in and out. So it comes into the practice by purchasing it and it leaves one way or another. So we want to know how many times that's happening throughout the year. Then I like to take it one step further to actually calculate the average days on the shelf. So a lot of times what I like to do is there's kind of a couple ways that you can calculate turnover, but you can calculate it for your entire inventory to see it on average. But you can also calculate it for an individual product. So if you suspect that a product is either maybe moving so quickly, right? Maybe you're like ordering it every other day. Let's just say, for example, you can calculate your turnover and then you can see how many times and then average number of days it's on the shelf before it's sold again. Then on the flip side, if you have a product where you're like, ooh, this is getting close to expiring again, and it's not an emergency medication, you could calculate the turnover for that item to say, oh, it is spending on average 85 days on the shelf. Let's just say, for example, that is much longer than what is ideal. So this can be very helpful, but it kind of can be a little bit cumbersome sometimes. So I like to decide how you're going to calculate it. So you might calculate it for your inventory overall, and then you might decide like, oh, every quarter I'm going to calculate 3 to 5 products, let's just say, that I suspect are on the shelf for way too long the most. So kind of that's how you can use it a little bit. So just kind of another math tip is, again, especially with this equation, because it is multi-step, I like to list out the variables, put my formula at the top, and then I can easily like plug and play into that formula, and then it doesn't get lost when you're kind of doing the calculation. So let's go ahead and we will go over to the whiteboard again, and let's look at some examples. Okay, Sophia, can you confirm that this looks how it should?
Yes, ma'am.
Yay. Okay, so let's look at our inventory turnover equation, right? So the very first step, we want to find our average inventory. So we need our starting inventory and our ending inventory. So let's look at this. So let's say that Orca Animal Hospital, they want to calculate their turnover. And so we're going to do this 2 different ways. The first, we're going to do for their inventory overall. Then we're going to calculate this for an individual product so you can kind of see it done both ways. So let's start with our step one. And so this is going to be for our entire inventory. And so we're looking at this over the last 12 months. So let's just say, so our average inventory, our calculation is going to be our starting inventory plus our ending divided by 2. And so this example, let's say on June 1st, so June of 2024. Yeah, I was like, wait, what year is it? So June of 2024 is going to be our starting inventory. So we need to know the total value of inventory on hand, June 1st, 2024. And so for Orca Animal Hospital, let's just say it was $62,000. Then we need to know the total inventory on hand for the end of the time period, which would be June of 2025. Whoa, that does not look like it too. So on June 2025, they had $55,000 on the shelf. So now we can kind of plug that into our formula. So I'll take our 62,000 plus our 55,000. And then we're going to divide those by 2 to find our average inventory. So putting that into our calculator. So then we have 117,000 divided by 2, which gives us 58,500. So that was kind of the average inventory for this practice. So then, now that we know that number, then we can move to step 2. So step 2 is where we actually calculate our turnover. So our turnover is going to be our total purchases divided by our average inventory. So for our total purchases, essentially what we want to know is from June 1st of 2024 to June 1st of 2025, what is the value of those total purchases that were made? And so for Orca Animal Hospital, they made $416,000 in purchases over the last 12 months. So then we'll divide that by our average inventory that we just found. So that is 58,500. And so if we put this into our calculator, so it's basically 7.11111 repeating forever. So essentially for Orca Animal Hospital, their inventory makes 7 turns per year. So what this means is their entire inventory rotates 7 times throughout the year. So that is actually pretty slow, right? Because if we look at our ideal turnover, let's just say they're on statement billing, so this would be 12 to 14 times per year. So this is almost half that. So this means that their inventory is sitting on the shelf for a fairly long time before it's ever sold. So now we can move to step 3 to find out the average days of the average number of days it's on the shelf for. So now we'll go to step 3. So to find our average days on the shelf, we're going to take 365 days divided by our turnover of 7.11 forever. So on average, our inventory is sitting on the shelf for 51 days before it's sold. Oh. So if you think about it, right, if we look at our pharmacy, we look at all of our inventory, if we just imagine dollar bills that are just in those bottles, right, if we have, then they sit there for 51 days before that they're sold. That's a long time for things to be just sitting on the shelf, not generating revenue. So if we go back to our cost of goods, right? If we see that that's higher than normal, we want to really look at what is my inventory turnover, because that gives us a really great picture of like, oh, I actually have a lot of inventory that's sitting on the shelf for a long time. So now let's do another example where we look at the an individual product. So let's just say, for example, we'll just do cephalexin. Although I'm sure for many practices, cephalexin does not sit on the shelf for a very long time. But so let's just say, so first step is we want to find our average inventory. So we'll do our start plus our end divided by 2. And so we'll say on June 1st of 2024, they had 1.5 bottles on the shelf. So you can do this calculation with whatever units you want to. So you can do this by bottles, you can do it by pills, you can do whatever kind of units you want to use. Just make sure that they're consistent throughout the equation. So I personally, for like individual things, right, I like to do it by bottle, by package, et cetera, rather than like, by unit. So we'll say they had June 1st, 2025, they had 1.5 bottles. Then June of 2025, let's just say they had 2.2 bottles. So then we're going to divide that by 2, which gives us 3.7 divided by 2. So their average inventory is 1.85 bottles. So then our next step is we're going to calculate our turnover. So if we go back up to our formula here, our turnover is our purchases. So our purchases divided by our average inventory. And so we'll just say, for example, this practice, they purchased 17 bottles throughout the year. And then we'll divide that by our average inventory. So 17 divided by 1.85. So this item has a turnover of 9.2. So this item, each bottle comes in and leaves the practice 9 times throughout the year. So then if we take it one step further to find the average days on the shelf, we'll take our 365 days divided by 9.2. So this product, we'll just round this up a little bit to 40. So for this product, an entire bottle spends about 40 days on the shelf before it's sold. So now that's not horrible, right? Kind of the ideal, right, is like 25 to 30 days, or which equals kind of that 12 to 14 times a year. So it's a little slow, but it's not awful. And so that's kind of the turnover calculation that you can use to see like, oh, is my inventory sitting on the shelf for way too long? Okay, so then let's talk about our last KPI. So I'm going to share my screen again here. So our last is considered the value of inventory on hand. And so this looks at how much inventory you have sitting on the shelf. Now, this isn't technically a KPI, if you will, but I find this to be invaluable because it looks at how much inventory do you have sitting on the shelf at the time. So, right, we have our cost of goods sold if they're too high, right? Our inventory turnover is probably too low. And then the value of our inventory on hand is probably too high. So this is really easy to calculate. And so there are two different ways that you can do this. So you can calculate your inventory carry by dividing and looking at your inventory to revenue ratio. So your total inventory value, you can divide that by your average monthly revenue to get a percentage. You can also look at this as the inventory per full-time equivalent veterinarian. So let's say if you have, I don't know, 5 full-time equivalent veterinarians, there's kind of a reference range for how much you should have per FTE. But it might make more sense for your practice to calculate it based upon a percentage. And so let's look at what are some benchmarks of what this could be. So for small animal GP locations, about 20%, roughly in that range is a good place to be. For ER and specialty, you might see between 12 and 15%. But a larger mixed animal, again, they might be 28 to 32%. And this also might fluctuate depending on the time of year. So if you have a lot of seasonal products, it may fluctuate. Or you can kind of target approximately $15,000 to $20,000 on hand per full-time equivalent veterinarian. And so to the left is an example inventory report where this specific one is from Avamark, and you can kind of see the total inventory value here. And so once we look at this number, as long as our system is accurate, we can see our total inventory value. And then we can use this number to calculate on average if we are aligned or if we are overstocked. And so that's where this inventory carry or the value of inventory in hand really shines, is are we overstocked and do we have way too much on hand? And so we'll just quickly do another quick little QD calculation so we can kind of look at this. And okay. So, So looking at our inventory carry, right, there's kind of two different equations here. So we'll call this number, we'll call this number 1 and this number 2. So for our inventory carry, this is
Nicole,
looking at the ratio. Oh, yes.
I'm not seeing any screen share of your iPad.
Oh, no.
Oh, now it is. Now we got it.
Oh.
I just had to scare it into working.
I mean, that's all really electronics needs, right? Okay. So for our inventory carry, remember we are looking at kind of the relationship between how much inventory we want on hand and our revenue. So if we look at number 1, our carry is going to be our total inventory value divided by our average monthly revenue, multiplied by 100. So let's just say our total inventory value for this practice is $135,000, and their average monthly revenue, let's just say, is $405,000. So I'll bring that over to our calculator, plug that in, and that gives us, whoa, that's not a number, 0.33. So if we multiply that by 100, that gives us about 33%. So if we go back to our benchmarks, small animal GP, we want to be about 20%. And so based upon this information, this practice probably has too much on hand. So their cost of goods are probably likely high, their turnover is likely low, and they do have too much on hand. So then we'll look at the similar kind of second equation here, comparing this to the number of full-time equivalent veterinarians. So the value of inventory is equal to, we go back here, our inventory value divided by our number of full-time equivalent veterinarians. And let's just say, for example's sake, that there is 5 DVMs at this practice. So we take our inventory value of 135,000, divide it by our 5 full-time equivalents. And so this gives us about $27,000 on hand per FTE. And so if you remember, $15,000 to $20,000 on hand per full-time equivalent veterinarian is a good place to be. So at $27,000, we are overstocked and we have too much on hand. And so this is where we really start to lean into, what are my order points? How do I know when something is low? How do I know how much to order at a time? And then, do I have just a ton of options, and can I consolidate those, or do I just have too many redundant options on the shelf? Okay, so those are kind of the 3 main metrics that I like to use to kind of measure the success and the health of my inventory. And so they can kind of be used in conjunction with one another to really understand and get a snapshot of the health of our inventory. So I am going to now turn it over to the wonderful Sophia so she can kind of show you how we automate this in Inventory Ally.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Nicole. Now that you walked us through those foundational metrics, I'm going to show, as you mentioned, how we can help make that process more automated, consistent, and even actionable with Inventory Ally. So let me just go ahead and steal the screen share here. And for those that have never heard of Inventory Ally before, let me just do a quick introduction. Inventory Ally is a veterinary-specific inventory software that helps hospitals stay organized, build smarter orders with dynamic reorder points, and actually track their progress over time. So whether your goal is to save time, reduce spending on inventory, or just stop guessing, we're here to help you and take your hospital's real usage, order history, and sales data and turn it into actionable insights. So as you can see here on my screen, I have our inventory analysis, and we know it's hard to measure progress manually. Nicole just walked us through, and she's done this all the time, and she knows it like the back of her hand. But it can be even harder to actually act on it in the hospital with everything going on. Everybody's here heard me say that springtime chaos and trying to calculate this on the go. So that's where inventory analysis dashboard comes into the rescue for you. It's updated every week with fresh data based on your actual usage within the software, whether it's being ordered, sold, counted, or adjusted. And it's actionable. So as we see here, we want to make it really easy for anybody to be able to come into our reporting, know where you stand, and need to maybe give it a little bit more TLC in the certain areas. So we could see with our legend here, you're doing great, need some attention, a little off track, or SOS, let's get some help from your dedicated customer success manager here at Inventory Ally. So another key component of our reporting is we give you a nice 30,000 view for a nice little gut check, or if you'd like, we can actually drill into all the specifics within the dashboard. So let's dive into a few of the metrics. One of my favorite ones is our inventory value, which Nicole just walked us through. So I know, Nicole, you walked us through all the calculations. Well, we make it much easier to be able to quickly report on your inventory value or carry. We calculate it using your information from our estimated on-hand quantities, your average daily usage, order history, and costs of those items. We could always drill down and see the specific categories, or we can let you know exactly how much of that eye lube you have sitting on your shelf at any given week. We actually even have customers that are sharing this information with their accounting teams to help update that P&L report. And Nicole, you mentioned how important it is to have that really, standardized and nice and clean. Well, we can easily export all of this right from Inventory Ally. Now, if we go back once more, we'll go into the inventory velocity. So this report here. And once we click into here, again, we'll see more information. And this will show us how many weeks of a product you have sitting in your hospital and really how fast is it moving. Slightly different than the turnover, but still that same type of metric on how fast those moving products are in your practice. So we can see what's really fast moving and maybe those slow movers that might need to be reconsidered of either, paring it down items that are redundant in your hospital or help guide you as to what you need to move to maybe your online pharmacy. Right below, you'll even find our handy product overstock dashboard, which is specific to your hospital and the usage of your inventory. So because we can automatically highlight these overstocked items, you can see not only how much in excess, but also that value of excess inventory that you have. So really helping you, cut waste, reduce that likelihood for expiring goods, and help free up that shelf space where I know many of you may be, tuning in with boxes all around you in the practice. Well, we want to be able to give you this information really easily without having to comb through every single item in your hospital. Okay. Now, let's take a peek at our inventory spend. So go over to our spend analytics here. And as Nicole mentioned, this can be confused with COGS, but it's different. The spend shows you that purchase, not what you've used or sold. So we track this weekly so that you can see your ordering habits and how your cash flow is impacted over time. You can drill in to see your vendors that you're purchasing it from, your categories, or even your top 20 items and see that year over year and month over month. Let's see, and then finally what we'll touch on before we jump into questions is the price change. So as you know, the worst thing you can see is that 6 months down the line, you saw that parasiticide, that it went up and you're charging at cost for it. Well, here with our report, we'll show you any given item that has a price increase from the last time you purchased it before it hurts your margin. So you can take action early and not months after that price increase. I know, a lot of data, and I only showed a little bit, but as you can see, we really want to be able to share that information of your hospital so you can have those guiding metrics, whether it's time, cost, or peace of mind. Inventory Ally really gives you that visibility and insight that you can really act on. And the best part, every metric that you see here is tied back to work that's happening in your hospital each week. So you're not just reporting on it, we're actually progressing together. Thank you so much, everybody, for letting me crash Nicole's party. I'd love to open up the session to questions.
Yes. Thank you so much, Sophia. So helpful. Okay, so thank you so much, Lindsay, for your question. So Lindsay asked, where do you find the starting and ending inventory dollar amounts for the average inventory calculation? So if you are looking at your practice management system, it's called something different in every software, but typically it's like your inventory report, your inventory on hand. Sometimes some practices called the inventory summary. But basically, typically the report in your software will show you all of the items that you have on hand, the quantity for each item, and then it'll total it at the bottom so you can see that total amount. Yeah, so then second question from Lindsay, how can you find your current total inventory value if your PIMS is not correct so you can calculate that inventory carry? So if your PIMS is not correct, you're going to really struggle to calculate this. So ideally you would need to have your inventory be correct. If you did a like an end of year inventory count, you can always use that value that you found, because typically that's when most practices are the most accurate, is at the end of your inventory count. So you can use that and that total value that you found at the end of the year, and then look at what is going to be your, your end of year count as well. So you can kind of use the end of year count for that. But as Sophia kind of showed, Inventory Ally kind of keeps it accurate for you throughout the year. So if that is of interest, as always, we'd love to, show you around and show you how we can help. But great question,
we
though.
have a special promotion at the end of this call for those that would like to sign up as well. We'll make sure to share that at the end of the presentation. And I know we had another question here, Nicole. Just posted that one over to you.
Oh, perfect. So question is, what is considered a good cost of goods percentage for a nonprofit that offers low cost care? So that's a good question. I don't know if there's like any exact benchmarks for your specific scenario, but that 18 to 22% is probably a good place to start. And then I would honestly talk to your accountant, your accounting team, to say if they have any recommendations for where you can refine it even further, because they're going to be the most familiar with your specific practice. So your accounting team might have, whatever is a good place to be for your specific practice, but probably starting at that 18 to 22% is a good place to be. And I am also happy to answer any inventory questions, not just related to metrics and KPIs, if you have other ones. Also, if you'd like to learn more and you are just wanting to learn about things, my book, Inventory Management for Veterinary Professionals, goes into lots of different things. So Hattie asks, how does delayed billing factor into the regular billing cycle? Yeah, so it depends on how much you are using delayed billing. Typically I see most practices will just take advantage of delayed billing for large promotional purchases. Ideally, right, we would still want to have that 12 to 14 times per year. But if you have a special promotion that you took advantage of, maybe you did a large flea, tick, and heartworm prevention order at the beginning of spring, you might have more on hand. But ideally, right, so I guess this kind of opens up a whole nother can of worms that I can go just keep rolling about. But for promotional purchases, I still want to only purchase what I'm going to sell in that time frame. So let's say if you got 3-month special financing, I would only purchase what you're going to use within those 3 months. So really just kind of your turnover remains the same because you're not buying a ton extra just because it's on promotion. We still want to kind of follow those same turnover guidelines. Hattie, hopefully that answers your question. But that's kind of how I kind of factor it in. If you had, let's say a large order, you could, yeah. So usually, let me back up. I like to make sure that I'm still purchasing in proper amounts and not over ordering just because it's on promotion. So I'm still maintaining that healthy turnover. What might be impacted and affected is your value of inventory in hand. You might have more inventory in hand than you normally would because you purchase on promotion. Great questions. Okay, and so kind of just in case anyone wants to follow along. You can find Sophia and I, we're both on LinkedIn. You can go to Inventory Ally or vetlogic.co to learn more. And actually, we have a special offer for you. And also, I recently released a quiz all about what is your inventory superpower. So you can go to vetlogic.co/quiz if you want to learn about your superpower. But there is the, oh, I should be sharing my screen. Is that?
Yeah, I was trying to get mine to show up too.
Oh, there we go. Okay. Oh, technology. So there is the QR code that you can use to access our special offer. Here's where you can find Sophia or myself. And then as always, if you have any questions or anything like that, please feel free to reach out to us. And yeah, thank you so much for spending part of your day with us. I always love our live events, and yeah, I just appreciate you so much. So
thank you so much, everyone. Hope you have a wonderful week ahead.